Morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here for the launch of what we are calling the Feeding Connecticut Caucus. We are so proud to have so many of our colleagues here, and honestly, based on the emails, we have a lot more members of the Feeding Connecticut Caucus who could not be with us today. As you can imagine, this is an incredibly busy session, made more so recently, but as we work through all of this, we want to make sure that we are prioritizing feeding our Connecticut residents. You may be aware that 1 in 8 people are hungry in Connecticut. That number sometimes fluctuates. That's the current number that we have. 1 in 6 of those are children. That actually represents a number that has unfortunately gone up in the past couple of years. It is not a great indicator when we have 1 in 6 children in Connecticut who are going hungry. And so that is why we have wonderful Connecticut Food Share here, our statewide food bank. They have over, I believe, 600 pantry partners, over 600 pantry partners. It used to be a lower number, but as you can imagine, more communities are doing their best to ensure that their residents are being fed. And I just want to talk about, hunger looks a little differently in everyone's community. In my community, where the mobile food share shows up every other Tuesday, primarily when you see about 100 people in line, they are almost entirely seniors or people with disabilities. I think it's important to point out the various demographics that make up that 1 in 8 adults who are hungry. It's very critical that they are provided with fresh food. It's wonderful that at many of these pantries it is client choice, and they have a way of educating people on the food that they are choosing, because that's critically important as well for long-term health. We know that so much of what we eat does determine our health, and so as we are providing this food, being able to educate is really important. But what we are here to talk about today is the CT NAP program. We have requested $10 million of appropriations dollars to go towards that CT nutrition assistance program. We find that this is critically important because if you look at the states around us, their state legislatures are providing their state food banks with much more funding power than we do. Currently, it's a little over $800,000. And so when you think about how many people are truly in need, and there may be more so in the very near future, we want to make sure that we are providing as much as we can.
$10 million is probably not enough money to help the actual need. But I'm a realist. I've been up here for 11 years now. I've served as the ranking member of Appropriations. I know the current vice chair of Appropes is here and is probably going to speak after me. But I think any additional funding that we can obtain to help people deal with food security. We live in the greatest state in the nation. We live between some of the greatest cities, big cities in the United States, and yet we still have issues in Connecticut where our food banks are constantly responding to needs. Okay? And I think we have an opportunity through this Feeding Connecticut Caucus to fix that, to bring awareness, and even if the awareness is making more people in our communities open their wallets and open their hearts to supporting these food banks. And if we can get more funding to help Food Share and they can help our food banks, that would be a great thing.
This is a bipartisan caucus that is important to seek out solutions for Connecticut families. We have to do all that we possibly can, and on that there can be no compromise, to ensure the levity of feeding families in this state for the better. And if that's not enough to reach to people, to understand, to get to people, for them to understand how important this is, I reckon back to what the good man David said, "For I've been young, but now I'm old. But I've never seen the righteous forsaken, nor his seed begging bread." Many are begging for bread in this state, and we need to ensure that the righteous will not be forsaken.
What we're seeing here in Connecticut right now is food insecurity at rates almost about as big as they were at the peak of the pandemic. And people often say to me, how is that possible? Unemployment is relatively low, and that's true. It's fueled mostly by two things. Inflation, i.e. the cost of groceries, and the cost and availability of housing. You go to any one of our lines anywhere in the state, that's what you're hearing people say. We also have this amazingly diverse state, and I was just talking to Senator Berthel before. He has and this is true for Representative Kavros DeGraw as well, they both have tremendous amounts of wealth in their districts. Tremendous, and I think this is probably true for all of you. Also, tremendous amounts of poverty in those same districts. People who don't know where their next meal is coming from, families that don't know where their next meal is coming from. And the choice is always the same. Do I pay my rent? Do I pay electricity? Do I pay heating? Do I pay for my medication? or do I pay for food? And every time they'll sit there and say, well, can't go without rent, can't go without heat, can't go without electricity, can't go without medication. I could skip a meal or two. In the state of Connecticut, in the richest state in the country, in the year 2025, that's not a decision anybody should ever have to make. And that's why we're up here today.